Hello, dear ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first lecture about King's Indian defense. And my name is Daniil Yuffa. I'm a grandmaster with over 10 years experience in this opening. So that's why the decision been made about the topic of the speech. It was not, hasn't been a difficult one for me because King's Indian is one of my favorite openings. So I'll be the one who provides you with some entertainment and as well with hopefully useful stuff. Yeah, as an intro, I would like to say that King's Indian is a great opening for players who love attacking chess, but in order to achieve good results in this entertaining but risky, as it couldn't be one-sided opening, you need to have a broad outlook and knowledge of different plans. And we will try to put more focus on only on attacking ideas in King's Indian defense. To first of all to catch your attention, and then to inspire you to play this interesting opening. All right, so the first lection will be about um, pawns march. This is the most frequently used plan by black players. So let's briefly scroll down all the moves uh, to see the classical line of King's Indian defense. But to start with, for an illustrative purpose, I decided to include two old games of top Soviet grandmasters, Leonid Stein and Tigran Petrosyan. So even earlier, I've heard a joke about Petrosyan who bought his uh, apartment in Moscow in a country house in the Moscow region due to his skills of playing King's Indian defense. So let's have a look at them and to understand how the pawn's march idea was invented more than 60 years ago. So d5, let's start from d5. Nowadays it's known to be a Petrosyan system, but peculiarly Petrosyan system was played not by Tigran Vartanovich nor against him, but why didn't succeed. Alright, so nowadays normally the most frequent response is to play a5. And here I've got an interesting idea with black when I was analyzing this particular line, for example, bishop g5. So once I've misplayed it badly and played knight a6 instead of h6, and I forgot the important words of my coach who told me that you should never allow that sort of configuration where the knight goes to d2 and the bishop can retreat to e3. As to these pieces, the pair of bishops on e3, e2, knight on d2, knight on c3. This is the best configuration according to statistic, and with these pieces, it becomes much easier to push the queen side at the same time. So here white obtains a very comfortable setup to develop their queen side attack and at the same time be ready against black counterplay on the king side. So when black tries to push some f5 and etc. Nevertheless, the engineer gives just small edge, but in fact it's much easier to play with white. And it doesn't really bother computer, and it says you can just continue simply with h5, a3, like king h7, h4, bishop h6, and here white has a strong move b4, maintaining an edge. Yeah, so it still looks a little bit unpleasant for black. They cannot really take on g5 because it may run to some g takes h takes g5 and then bishop takes h5 will be the threat. So white has space advantage and better setup. So that's why obviously black should start with h6 first. And here white has a couple of options. So bishop e3 is a move that I used to play before. Obviously we have to respond with knight g4. We cannot allow knight d2. So for example, this line I've played with white pieces against Luke McShane, and I succeeded in the World Cup 2019. And just recently I found an interesting idea for black, which hasn't been really played yet. Knight f6, pawn takes, queen c1, king h7. Nowadays it's a very rare move because f4 is known to be the best, but for all of a sudden king h7 can be played as well. And g4 used to be the refutation before. Okay, so let's say if white castles, then their previous play just doesn't make any sense. So g4 has to be played, and here I found an interesting move, knight fd7. Okay, just to look through the history a little bit, starting with knight a6. So the point of this knight a6 that unfortunately g5 comes with a tempo, and now if knight d7, pawn takes, bishop f6, after knight g5, black has to give up the dark squared bishop. Otherwise, the knight enters e6, and at least white can win an exchange, but obviously black will hope for that because this knight on e6 will be a real nail. So on the problem of knight e6 that a g5 and then knight takes g5 comes with a tempo. That's why knight fd7 is some sort of an improvement. And here after g5 black can simply play knight c5, g takes h6, bishop f6, knight g5, king h8, and now knight e6 is not a threat anymore. Okay, just to mention, if white takes on f5 instead of g5 as an alternative, knight c5, bishop e3, knight a6. So this is a very important order of moves. Black has to start with knight fd7 instead of knight a6 to prevent g5. Rook g1, rook f7, queen d2, bishop f5, and after castle, black plays queen e7, and the next moves would probably be knight b4 and something else. And after knight b4, black create a very sneaky threat of knight takes a2. So this is okay. Let me show you the threat. So then knight takes on a2, and if knight takes, knight b3 will be the mate. So at least the game is double-edged. This is what black normally dream about in any opening. Okay, let's get back to the line after knight c5, g takes h6, bishop f6, knight g5, king h8, and here white has a couple of options, f4 or h4. f4 looks kind of tempting because you wouldn't really expect black to take on g5, but breaking all stereotypes, black can give up their strong dark square bishop, but in return they create some sort of a shield for their king. Yeah, like for example, if white plays h4, white is a pawn up, and optically white's king is safer, but in fact no. Black plays bishop f5, g6 is not possible anymore, the bishop on d2 is dead, and this is a very unique position which I would rather prefer for black. Alright, so instead h4 can be played, f4, knight c4, and still black gives up the bishop. The bishop has done its duty. So if knight g5, bishop f5, then knight a6, queen f6 is coming, white is definitely carrying more risk. If knight c5, black plays bishop h6, and white can really obtain a pair of bishops, but after queen e7, bishop f3, there is a very cool move, knight a6. So bishop takes b7, runs into knight c5, and then knight d3 fork is threatening, and it leads to a double-edged position. And if h takes g5, which is probably the main line, black plays knight takes e4, g6, bishop f5, exclamation mark, g7, king h7, pawn takes rook and promotes to a queen, queen takes f8, and a couple of white bishops just still remain in captivity, so they cannot really be activated that fast. And at the same time, black is opting for knight a6, knight c5, or knight e7, knight c5. Their king is relatively safe, and white has to be very, very patient because their king in the long run can uh, find himself in a danger. Okay, so it's just a cool idea with knight fd7. Let's get back to the position. So here king h7 used to be a rare move. G4, and then we play knight fd7, which is a strong novelty. All right. So bishop h4 is probably stronger computer-wise. Now we can freely play knight a6 as white cannot put their bishop on a3 anymore. And if they play knight e2 and try to implement the same plan, castle. Yeah, so black also can go for a little trick there, play knight c5. And after b3, for all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there comes the trick, knight fe4, played by Garry Kasparov in his blitz game against Vladimir Kramnik in 1994. And after rook c1, knight e2, Kasparov converted this position into a win. Black has a pair of strong bishops, two pawns, and I think now the compensation is complete. I think black is simply better. Their position is almost perfect, so they don't have a queen, but they gave it up for a lot of things. So I think this position is just great for them, and Kasparov proved it in the real game. So queen e8, yeah, like obviously white can play something else. I mean, instead of playing b3, let's say they can start with queen c2 or rook b1 or a3, not allowing queen knight fe4. So queen e8 is probably uh, a bit better move, as it seems multifunctional. And normally the game develops as it is, like f3, h5, white plays bishop f2, knight h7, and then black's idea is to play bishop h6 and push f5. So it still remains very, very double-edged. Okay, just for an illustrative purpose, I decided to show it, that sort of a line. Yeah, but h6 was played in the game. Castle, knight h7, this is one of my favorite games, played between two strong Soviet players. And the player who had black pieces was Leonid Stein, famous Soviet Ukrainian grandmaster. Um, passed too early at the age of 39, but he was extremely talented. So far, both sides playing quite naturally. So, but c6 was played, and now black has a choice between, like, let's say playing b6 and closing up the queen side, or taking on b takes on c6. So the problem of b6 is that now black haven't really made any kind of progress on the king side, and now white king can make a flight to Varennes with king f2 and then king e1, king d2. So this king escape plan really works well in this case. And now it's all black effort seems useless. I mean, on the king side. All right, so b takes c6 is the best. Obviously, I have to warn you that this game was like full of mistakes from both sides, but it just shows of the complexity of the position. In King's Indian, b5, and bishop of f8 was played first, which is a very logical move because d5 is something that white has to bear in mind just in case, because the bishop can be developed on c5 with a big effort. Instead of bishop f8, engine suggests playing g5 and push the pawns first. a4, h5, a5, g4, knight f2, knight g5. And it's clear that position is very double-edged. So bishop f8 was some sort of inaccuracy. White plays knight b4. Still g5 um, was possible. Still aforementioned plan could be implemented. a4, g4, and after f takes g4, rook g7. So we gave up a pawn, but then h5 comes, and at least we open up a file. But d5 was played in the game, a very human-looking attempt to liberate the dark squared bishop, dark squared tiger from a cage. Knight d5, bishop c5, king h1, knight h5, with a clear intention of playing queen h5 and knight g3 mate. Queen e1 was played, protecting from all of these threats. And Stein nevertheless played knight g3. Exclamation mark. I decided to put an exclamation mark. No doubt that computer dislikes all black concept of play. And like according to computer, probably black were about to resign. But I think in Stein's mind the game was just beginning. So yeah, it dislikes all black's concept of play, but it's very hard to deal with this flurry of pieces hanging in attack human-wise. H takes g3, queen g5, g4, h5, g3 was played, exclamation mark, h takes g4. And here the show begins. King g2, the strongest was played. F takes g4 gives black a full compensation after bishop g4, king g2, rook of af8. f3 is coming in some lines. Uh, Black's king is much safer, and the presence of this a1 rook is not feeling at the moment. I mean, white is a clear piece up, but the position is very unclear. It's just so unclear. King g2 was the best, rook af8, and white played bishop d2, which for all of a sudden became a slight inaccuracy, and surprisingly this simple and natural move gives up a big chunk of advantage. So white should have started with rook h1, and for all of a sudden black cannot improve their pieces. Yeah, without a doubt it would be hard to realize during the game, but let's get deeper in the lines. Yeah, for example, yeah, g takes f3 is like the main. If bishop d4 first, bishop a3, bishop d5 fails to e takes d5, pawn takes, bishop takes, bishop takes, queen takes, queen takes, king f1, e4, so black is, yeah, like rook g1 and or bishop f8 both give crucial advantage, but somehow I liked bishop b2, queen f3, queen takes, pawn takes, rook h6, and this is probably the easiest way to convert the advantage because the g6 pawn falls. Black has to play some rook g7, awkward move, or rook f6, but with this immense pawn structure on the queen side and then an extra exchange, I don't think it would be a big deal for white to convert the edge. Yeah, so unfortunately bishop d4 doesn't work. Black should try other things. G takes f3, bishop takes, bishop g4, and yeah, like let's say if queen d1 there is bishop e6, white doesn't give any clarity. Yeah, it doesn't give any clarity to white. Instead, g takes f4 has to be played here. Once again, bishop g4, g takes f4, e takes, queen h4, bishop takes, king takes, queen e5, and after king e2, king safely escapes with the same route, king d3, king c2, and white is piece up, and black seemingly lacking compensation for it. Yeah, so the black attack starts to fizzle out. All right, so instead of uh, G takes f3, which was the best here. So okay, let's get back to the game. Queen h6 was played by Stein. I've noted that it was a reciprocal courtesy from Leonid Stein, but at the same time he had something very unique on his mind. Let's get deeper into some sidelines. If G takes f3, which seemed very tempting, I think, for Stein as well, and obviously he was calculating this move. Rook f3, knight f6, queen f6, knight e5. So black is preparing the plan with rook h7, definitely G takes f4, rook h7, and it leads to an insane position. White uh, seemingly in little danger. Black has a very dangerous attack. Still, white can hold the game, showing some preciseness after queen g3. Pawn takes bishop c3, which is the best. Pawn takes, rook takes, king takes, bishop takes, rook takes, knight f4, protecting everything. No checkmate. The bishop on e6 is hanging, and there is very little material left on the board, so seemingly it should end in a draw. Instead, Stein played queen of h6, and yeah, so white could, yeah, like it's hard to be as cold-blooded as an iron, taking the pawn, and after knight g5 playing rook h1, like not paying any attention to these f3 threats, queen g7, bishop c4. It looks very contradictory because now white gives up the control on f3 square, f3 king f1, queen h7. Very strong move with the idea of like taking with the rook if in case if white takes, and then some checkmates are threatening on h1. And here it would work unless uh, rook h4. Only if rook h4 uh, would be foreseen from afar in this long line. So rook h4 is like the savior here. Instead, rook h1 was played in the game, and it seems the most logical, obviously. And Stein played queen g7. This idea is huge. Maybe this is the best illustration of pawn's march idea, but in a very untypical case. And it's really hard to believe that black can slow play this position, being a piece down. But still, it's not easy to deal with it. Uh, Voluntarily ambushing the queen puzzles white in the game. So queen g5 would be logical at the same side, but after queen g5, black attack really stucks because there is no active plan anymore. White can try many things. They can play rook c1 first, luring bishop e3, or they can play rook d1 as well. So the problem that now after g takes f3, there is bishop takes, bishop g4, queen e2, and there is no single threat. So queen g7 is a huge idea, seen by Stein from afar. Pawn takes, e takes e4. So it went a bit wrong, but it required a big preciseness to calculate it all. And in a nutshell, white has to trade as many pieces as they can, reducing black's attacking potential. And the best way to do that is knight a4, bishop g4, bishop c3, chasing down the bishop. Bishop takes d5, pawn takes, rook e8, queen d2, and yeah, let's say if black plays rook e2. If bishop c3, just knight takes, knight g5, rook f1. Now white is in time to bring all the pieces to protect the king. Rook e3, knight e1, pawn takes, bishop takes, queen e5, queen b2. Another chase down, knight f3, queen e5, rook e5, rook f3. Black is a piece down and losing position. And instead of rook e2, instead of bishop c3, queen e2, Bishop c3, knight c3, queen c3, rook f1, and black cannot really activate their last piece by playing knight g5 because of queen e8 check all the time. Getting back to the game, so rook d1 was played, and this another natural move becomes an inaccuracy, which is a very typical story for kings in a defense. g5, e5, and here Stein had to play g takes f3, bishop takes, but still it would give equal chances. Black is still not better. Knight g5 with an idea to play knight g3, preparing some bishop f2 checks or f2. So this is still very double-edged, despite the fact that white has a clear piece up. Black still has a better king. The main factor, according to Dorfman's method. Instead, Stein decided to win back at least a pawn, and it could cost black a game. After bishop g3, pawn takes king f1, queen e1, rook e1. That wasn't really difficult, but I think both players were already in time trouble. F takes g4 was played, and queen e2 probably was missed. Queen e2, f3. So the problem of knight e2 would be that bishop takes d5, king h2, and after knight f6, despite being a queen down, black is checkmating. So rook h7 is inevitable threat. That could easily be missed. Queen e2, f3, queen f3, rook f3. And still it was not too late for white, and I suppose that white missed bishop e1, bishop g4, bishop g3. I mean, something is this line. a4, knight h5, rook h5, bishop h5, knight e4. A very important jump. And this is the savior. Rook g3, king g3, bishop g1, knight c5. White has a huge drawing chance. Their pawn structure is great. White has to... Yeah, so black is kind of pinned, is kind of tied down a bit to protect the c7 and a7 pawn. Otherwise, it can even get risky. So in this position, white has a huge drawing chance.